Start with Merle, our budget analyst.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Merle Riedel. I am with Legislative Research Department, and today I will be reviewing the agency request and governor's recommendation for the Kansas Department of Transportation. You should have a document in front of you. It's called the budget analysis with a blue band across the top. Just quickly on the first page, or page 1525, just quickly review the purpose of the Department of Transportation. It is a cabinet level agency headed by a secretary appointed by the governor. The purpose of KDOT is to coordinate the planning, development, and operation of various modes and systems of transportation within the state. These modes involve aviation, highways, public transportation, roadways, and waterways. However, the agency's primary focus is approximately 10,000 of the state highway system's more than 140,372 miles of public roads and highways. Of those miles, approximately 10,000 are maintained by KDOT, 238 by the Kansas Turnpike Authority, and approximately 130,000 by local governments. Of the miles of highway maintained by the state, 635 are on the interstate highway system. Interesting note, the state of Kansas ranks 4th nationwide in the number of public roads and 5th in the number of bridges. Moving on to the next page, 1525, just a few notes about the particularities of the KDOT's budget. Under the header, State Operations and Capital Improvements, in a state agency budget, state operations include agency operating costs for salaries and wages and other operating expenditures, including contractual services, commodities, and capital outlay. However, KDOT's budget differs from other agency budgets in that expenditures typically considered state operations are included with budgeted capital improvement expenditures. For example, the construction program includes capital improvement expenditures, but also contains expenditures classified as state operations. So if you look on the first page, just quickly to illustrate what I'm talking about, you'll see the largest category on that table on the first page is capital improvements. For many of the agencies you've seen so far, that relates exclusively to buildings. But for KDOT, that is where all the highway projects are categorized as capital improvements. So you can see that's really where the significance of expenditures are for this agency. Moving on to page 1528, you'll see a table listed on that page that lists expenditures by category and the financing provided. The table at the bottom, the Department of Transportation reportable operating expenditures increased by $888.5 million from FY 2015 to 22. The majority of expenditures are for letting construction projects that preserve, modernize, and expand the roads and bridges that compose the state's highway system. Construction projects averaged 75.7% of the agency's annual budget since implementation of the Ike Plan. Other significant expenditures include aid to local governments, primarily from the Special City and County Highway Fund, for routine maintenance of the highway system. Moving on to page 1529, we'll review the FY 2023 budget analysis. You can see under item 1, there were no significant changes to this agency's budget, no significant changes from the amounts approved by the 2022 legislature. And then we'll review the agency's estimate for revised estimate for FY 2023. The agency submits a revised estimate of $2.8 billion, including $2.3 billion from the State Highway Fund in expenditures for FY 2023. This is an all funds increase of $778.4 million and a State Highway Fund increase of $661.3 million above the FY 2023 approved amount. The revised estimate includes 2,283.3 FTE positions, which is a decrease or a net decrease of 14 FTE positions below the FY 2023 approved number. If you move on to the next page, 1530, we'll look at the individual adjustments. The first item on that page is item number 2. It is the supplemental. This is the only supplemental request from the agency. This is a supplemental request for building capital improvement cost increases. The agency requests $8.8 million, all from the State Highway Fund, for increased capital improvements costs for buildings in FY 2023. Generally, the agency notes a 50% increase in material and services for building projects due to inflation and requests additional funding to supplement construction of the District 1 headquarters in Topeka, sub-area modernization efforts, and routine rehabilitation and repair. Item number 2 is salaries and wages. The revised estimate includes an increase of $1.4 million, all from the State Highway Fund, for salaries and wages expenditures in FY 23. This funding includes salary adjustments to address staffing needs in traffic safety, engineering, information technology services, and financial management. The request includes a net decrease of 14 FTE position, which results from a decrease of 54.5 FTE positions in maintenance and construction programs, partially offset by an increase of 40.5 FTE positions in administration and transportation planning and modal support programs. So the agency notes the position decrease is due to difficulty filling vacancies in equipment operator and engineer positions. Item number 4 is heavy equipment. The revised estimate includes a decrease of $4.4 million for replacement of heavy equipment, primarily talking about dump trucks. Agency notes additional equipment was purchased in FY 22 above the original estimate in anticipation of pending supply chain disruptions, and that reduces the need in FY 2023. Item 5, unmanned aerial system. The estimate includes an increase of $300,000 for purchase of UAS to support highway and bridge inspections. Engineering contractual services. The estimate includes an increase of $19.1 million in contractual engineering services for FY 2023. Transportation planning technology development. The revised estimate includes an increase of $10 million as aid to local governments for technology developments. This includes expenditures from broadband infrastructure construction grant for broadband expansion and transportation technology development fund for development of innovative technologies in vehicular and air transportation. Item 8 is aviation. The revised estimate includes an increase of $2.6 million for the aviation sub-program in FY 2023. Increase is attributable to the addition of $5.5 million from the State Highway Fund for development of UAS capabilities at airports. And this also includes the Kansas Airport Improvement Program, which provides grants to local airport and facilities improvements. Public transit, the estimate includes an increase of $7.8 million in operating assistance for transport of persons with disabilities, older adults, and the general public. It's primarily attributed to increase in funding from the Federal Transit Authority. Item 10 is the Rail Service Improvement Fund. The estimate includes an increase of $13.3 million to rehabilitate and make safety improvements for railroads, or to railroads. Item 11 is the Short Line Rail Improvement Fund. The estimate includes an increase of $2.2 million for the Short Line Rail Improvement Fund. This is primarily unexpended monies carried over from FY 22. Item 12, local projects. The estimate includes a decrease of $4 million as aid to cities and counties through the Federal Fund Exchange Program for preservation and improvement of local roads, streets, and bridges. Item 13, highway maintenance contractual services. The estimate includes a decrease of $1.4 million for contractual highway maintenance services. These include items such as equipment rental, litter removal, weed spraying, technology services for maintaining the highway lighting traffic signal systems. Items 14 through 16 begin to get into those large highway construction projects. You'll see item 14 is construction expansion, so building new highways. The revised estimate includes an increase of $478.2 million for expansion projects. These are primarily due to increased non-interstate capacity projects and interstate capacity projects. These projects would include the I-235 in Sedgwick County, US Highway 54, and US Highway 69 projects. Item 15, construction preservation. The estimate includes an increase of $87.6 million in capital improvement preservation projects to maintain roads and bridges in as-built condition. The increase is primarily attributable to non-interstate pavement resurfacing and bridge repair and replacement. Item 6 is construction modernization. The revised estimate includes an increase of $38.3 million in capital improvement modernization projects to bring roads up to current safety standards. The increase is primarily attributed to increased integration of innovative technologies, such as the connected vehicle infrastructure and non-interstate roadway improvements. Item 17, construction local capital improvements. There's an increase of $21.2 million for local projects. Increase is attributable to increases for the City Connecting Link program, federal aid projects, which is partially offset by a decrease in the local bridge transfer program. Item 18 relates to building capital improvements. So there's an increase of $1.5 million in capital improvement expenditures for buildings. The increase primarily includes sub-area modernization and support of land purchases for the relocation of the District 1 headquarters in Topeka. 9 is debt service. The revised estimate includes an increase of $95.7 million, all from the Highway Bond Debt Service Fund. This includes increased principal payments, partially offset by decreased interest payments, and this is related to early payoff of bonds, and the majority of which these bonds are 20-year bonds. Moving on to page 1532, we'll look at the governor's recommendation. Really, the only adjustment that the governor makes is item 21. The recommendation includes a decrease of $3.5 million in expenditures, all from the Special City and Highway Fund. All from the Special City and County Highway Fund, which is budgeted as aid to local units of government in FY 2023. The revenue decrease is due to a decreased revised estimate by the Highway Revenue Estimating Group. So the Highway Revenue Estimating Group is projecting a decrease in revenue to the Highway Fund, so the governor has adjusted expenditures to align with that decrease. Mr. Chairman, that's quickly through FY 2023, and I can stand for questions.
Any questions for our analyst on 23? Representative Resman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The connected vehicle infrastructure, is that EVs?
The connected vehicle infrastructure, the agency may have more details, but as I understand it, that is providing technology or embedding technology in the highway system. I'm not sure that it is EV, but I think it may have more to do with navigation and tracking distance traveled. So the short answer is the agency probably has more detail.
Okay, so it might be self-driving vehicles, and
I think that it's possible that could support self-driving.
And is there anything in here that shows the loss of revenue because of EVs that are not gassing up?
No, there's nothing in here that would show a direct link to loss of revenue related to EV. The Revenue Estimating Group is estimating that there is a general loss of revenue to the State Highway Fund. That could be for various factors related to consumption or patterns of use, and I don't know that that would be entirely attributable to electronic vehicles, though that could be a component to it.
Right.
Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I want to call your attention to item number 10, Rail Service Improvement Fund. What exactly are the improvements that we're talking about here that money's going to be expended on?
Yeah, so I think this is generally related to support that is provided to railroad operators, primarily for safety measures, be they at intersections or railroad crossing, but I believe it's typically related to safety improvements along the highway or along the rail system.
Okay, so we're not helping the major railroads improve their railroad capabilities, right? This is for like railroad crossings or turnouts or something like that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that is my understanding, is that this helps provide, whether it's alignment of the rail or crossing systems, crossing intersections, it's exclusively related to safety measures.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anything further for the analyst? All right, we'll go to 24.
All right, moving on to FY 2024. This is looking at page 1534. You'll see the agency request $2.2 billion, including $1.8 billion from the State Highway Fund for FY 2024. This is an all funds decrease of $678.2 million and a State Highway Fund decrease of $521.8 million below the 2023 revised estimate. The request includes 2,283.3 FTE positions, which is unchanged from the revised number. Looking at the agency's adjustment, you'll see item 1, salaries and wages. The request includes an increase of $8.1 million, all from the State Highway Fund for salaries and wages expenditures in 2024. This includes $6.9 million for a pay plan among certain critical positions, such as equipment operators, engineering technicians, equipment mechanics, and professional engineer. The agency indicates this pay plan would affect approximately 1,500 FTE positions, with all positions in the plan receiving at least a 5% pay increase, and certain positions, such as equipment mechanics and civil engineers, receiving more. Item number 2, engineering contractual services. The request includes a decrease of $2.5 million in contractual engineering services in FY 2024. If you'll remember, in FY 2023, we saw an increase of that as the construction projects are also increasing in 2023. In 2024, we see a decrease in those contractual services. Item 4, heavy equipment. The request includes an increase of $3.5 million for replacement of heavy equipment. If you'll remember, in 23, we saw a decrease primarily because they were able to purchase many of these items in 22. So in FY24, the agency is requesting to return to their traditional level of expenditures for equipment replacement. Item 4, information technology. The request includes an increase of $930,000 for development and maintenance of numerous IT platforms used throughout the agencies. These can include systems for traffic safety data collection, project management, grant management, and other systems. Item 5 is transportation planning technology development. Request includes a decrease of $1 million from the Transportation Technology Development Fund in aid to local governments for innovative technologies. Item 6, the aviation program. The request includes an increase of $2.9 million for the Kansas Airport Improvement Program, which we've talked about, provides grants to local airports. Item 7, public transit. We have a decrease of $3.6 million for assistance to transport of persons with disabilities. It's primarily related to decrease in federal funding from the Federal Transit Authority. Item 8, Rail Service Improvement Fund. The request includes a decrease of $13.4 million for rehabilitation and safety improvements to railroads. Decrease is primarily attributed to decreased federal funding. Item 9, Short Line Rail Improvement Fund. The request includes a decrease of $7.2 million for the short line rail improvements. An annual transfer of $5 million from the State Highway Fund to this fund is scheduled to cease after FY 2023, pursuant to 2022 SB 173, or the Ike Transportation Plan. Local projects, the request includes an increase of $665,875 from the Special City and County Highway Fund as formula grants to cities and counties. And this was an estimate. This was generally an estimate provided when the budget is submitted, and then the Highway Revenue Estimating Group will further refine that, and you'll see there's an adjustment related to that. Item 11 is the construction expansion. These begin, again, those categories of large highway projects. The request includes a decrease of $729.4 million for expansion projects. Item 12, construction preservation. The request includes an increase of $23.1 million for preservation projects to maintain roads and bridges in as-built condition. Item 13, the request includes an increase of $173.3 million for modernization projects to bring roads up to current safety standards. Moving on to the next page, item 14, construction local. The request includes an increase of $10.5 million in local projects. The increase is attributable to increased funding for federal aid projects, offset by decreases in the City Connecting Link program and local bridge transfer. Item 15, we have building capital improvements. The request includes a decrease of $8.7 million in capital improvement expenditures for buildings. The decrease is primarily attributed to expenditures for the initial phase of the District 1 headquarters construction in Topeka that occurs in FY 2023 but does not occur in FY 24. Debt service, the revised estimate includes a decrease of $135.5 million, all from the bond debt service fund for FY 2023. If you'll remember, we had a large expenditure to pay off debts early in FY 23, so we see a decrease in FY 24. Moving on to the governor's recommendation, really the governor has just two recommendations. Item 18, salaries and wages. The recommendation includes a decrease of $433,415, all from the State Highway Fund, for an agency plan for salary increases for certain critical positions in 24. The decrease is due to the governor recommending a modified pay plan that reduces a pay increase for civil engineers from 25% to 17.5%. Item 19 is the revised highway revenue estimating group. Recommendation includes a decrease of $4.2 million in expenditures from the Special City and County Highway Fund, which is budgeted as aid to locals. The revenue decrease is due to a decreased revised estimate from the Highway Revenue Estimating Group. Again, so we see the Revenue Estimating Group is projecting that there will be a decrease in revenue, so this is the governor adjusting expenditures to align with that. If you look on page 1534, there's some additional details on that supplemental request from the agency. They were requesting $8.8 million for building projects. You'll see that really breaks out. Most of these increases are attributed to, the agency attributes to inflation. And you'll see 5.5 of that would be to supplement the construction of the new District 1 headquarters in Topeka, 2.7 for sub-area modernization, sub-area being offices and shops in the sub-area location, $600 for rehabilitation and repair costs. I would just draw you to page 1538, the second item on there. There was one recommendation related to KDOT from the 2022 interim committee who makes recommendations to the 2023 legislature. And this relates to recommending that KDOT consider conducting a cost analysis study to construct and enhance mass transit systems in Johnson, Sedgwick, and Wyandotte County. You will see the remainder of the pages break down, provide a program analysis for each of the programs within the Department of Transportation. I will just hit on the last couple pages. 1551 goes into the capital improvements or provides details on the capital improvements for buildings. The Kansas Department of Transportation maintains approximately 980 buildings across different facilities. FY23 capital improvement, the agency submits a revised estimate of $33.2 million for capital improvements for buildings. This is an increase of $10.2 million above the 2023 approved amount. Increase is primarily attributed to that agency's supplemental enhancement request of $8.8 million. You'll see some details there related to the rehabilitation and repair. On the next page, you'll see information as the agency will be re-roofing locations, locations such as the Anthony Dome, the Ashland Dome, the Belleville Motor Carrier Station, the Manhattan Dome, Norton Cone, Pratt Cone, Troy Cone, and Waverly Dome. I feel like I'm talking about a bunch of brothers or something. Sub-area modernization, we talked briefly about this. The agency requests $8.7 million for sub-area modernization for 4 locations. Agency states sub-area facilities were constructed mostly in the 1950s and 60s, and these facilities are insufficient to accommodate modern equipment and technologies. So those modernization locations would include Beloit, Blaine, Iola, Sharon Springs. You'll see details on there for proposed land purchases chemical storage facilities. And when we talk about chemical storage facilities, we're really talking about salt storage. Finally, on the right column on page 1552, there's details on the District 1 headquarters. The agency requests $16.7 million for the initial phase of a 2-year project to construct a new District 1 headquarters in Topeka. Total project cost is estimated at $24.2 million. The District 1 headquarters is responsible for 17 counties. The current complex, located at 121 Southwest 21st Street in Topeka, includes an office and maintenance shop originally constructed in 1934. Agency indicates current facilities are inadequate to store modern vehicles and requires transport of heavy equipment through the congested urban core of Topeka. Project would relocate and consolidate on a single site on a location on existing KDOT property at Southwest 21st Street and Rice Road near the I-70 interchange in East Topeka. Moving on to the next page, you'll see that the governor concurs with the agency's estimate for FY 2023. For FY 24, you'll see very similar expenditures, and I would just note on the final page, 1554, you'll see the second year of expenditures for the District 1 headquarters that decreased. They're requesting just $7.5 million. And the District 1 headquarters was a project that was approved by the 2022 legislature, and so you see it reflected here. And Mr. Chairman, I would note that this capital improvement budget has been heard in the Joint Committee on State Building Construction, and they concurred with the governor's recommendation. Mr. Chairman, I can stand for questions or take a seat.
Questions for Merle on 24? Representative Resman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 1536, number 18, salary increases for certain critical positions.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that are not considered critical, are they going to get the 5% increase?
So as part of this agency pay plan, those positions that are named would receive a minimum of a 5% increase.
Critical.
Those critical positions, correct.
So then everyone would get a 5%.
So it's my understanding that only employees that receive an agency pay plan, which in this case would be those critical positions, would receive a pay increase through their agency pay plan. As part of the governor's recommendation, she excludes individuals that receive an increase as part of the agency pay plan. So for the Department of Transportation, it would be a mix. For those who get this agency pay plan, they are excluded from the statewide 5%. For those not included in that, they would be included in the statewide 5%.
Any further questions? All right. Thank you, Merle. We will move into Acting Secretary Calvin Reed. Welcome to committee, Secretary.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. I'll go over our presentation here. I do want to clarify maybe a couple things, and Merle, I think maybe we need to understand a little bit better. I do believe that the pay enhancement plan that the governor passed by executive order last fall was separate from what is being discussed right now in terms of what's being debated in this year's budget. So I think it's separate. So those folks that got pay increases from last year's pay enhancement, we would anticipate that they would also get a pay increase if it was passed for all state employees this coming year. Now, to your question about critical employees, I would say all employees of KDOT are critical. We had to draw a line somewhere with the budget that we had. Really what we looked at is, rather than critical, and I'll talk about this later in my presentation, rather than critical, it's those employees that are vastly out of market in terms of pay. So yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I realize all employees are critical. And that's why I'm concerned about pay raises, because we want to keep good employees and we want to be able to hire. And I also noticed that the certain critical positions were outlined in here. off the top of my head, I can't tell you what they are, but engineers, I think they were some of those, and
Yeah, engineering technicians,
yeah,
engineers,
mechanics.
equipment operators, equipment
Right.
mechanics.
So they did list the critical positions that they wanted to.
Those were positions that we identified that were grossly out of market and that needed pay bumps for us to be able to continue to retain and recruit for those positions. Thank you, Brendan. So as I said, Calvin Reed, Acting Secretary of Transportation. I'm going to talk, not go into nearly as much detail as Merle did about our budget, but I do want to talk about some high points out of our budget so that we can have a conversation at the end. So I'll talk a little bit about revenues and expenditures. I'm also going to talk about some of our program updates that we're envisioning for fiscal year 24, and also some updates on our performance metrics. So just as an overview and maybe to highlight some of the discussion from Merle's presentation about how we fund transportation in Kansas. So you can see, three different lines here on this slide. The top line is all of the revenue streams that feed into the state highway fund. And just remember that KDOT is not funded out of the state general fund. We are funded out of the state highway fund. But motor fuels tax actually feeds into two different funds. It feeds into the state highway fund. It also feeds into the special city county highway fund. We are projecting, and I'll talk about this later, but we are projecting the state highway fund also a decrease in motor fuel tax revenue into the state highway fund, just as they are projecting a decrease in motor fuel tax revenue into the special city county highway tax fund. Also, I just want to give a reminder that a portion of the sales tax going into the state highway fund is set to adjust as the phase out of sales tax on food occurs. So over time, as part of that bill, the percentage that was to go of the sales tax that was to go into the state highway fund is set to increase as the sales tax on food decreases. And the point of that was to keep KDOT whole so we could continue to develop the IKE program as envisioned. So in terms of revenues, overall revenues are projected to remain steady in fiscal year 24 compared to fiscal year 23 at about $2 billion. For fiscal year 24, we're projecting we will receive that same with sales tax revenue continuing to be a key funding source for the state highway fund at over 1/3 of KDOT's revenue stream. It is estimated the state highway fund will receive $30 million more from sales tax revenue in fiscal year 24 compared to fiscal year 23. Some of the other revenues that we don't have listed out there include special vehicle permits, interest, insurance reimbursements, and recovery of prior year expenditures. Now, if you look at this over time, you will see the trend of these different funding streams. Overall, total revenues have stayed steady at about $2 billion for the past couple of years, and we expect them to remain at $2 billion for fiscal year 24. Sales tax revenue has increased steadily for the past few years, and we expect that to increase again in fiscal year 24. At the same time, like I said earlier, motor fuels tax revenues have been pretty steady over the past 5 years, but we have seen a dip in fiscal year 23, and we're projecting a similar dip in fiscal year 24. We think that dip is primarily to higher fuel prices, lessening demand of vehicle miles traveled on the highway system. Federal funds also are a huge component of our revenue stream, and they are reimbursement based. So as we spend money on projects, we get reimbursed through FHWA. And so as we have this uptick in projects, we expect that our federal reimbursements will increase also. The next component of our budget are transfers. And we really break transfers into two things: ordinary transfers and extraordinary transfers. Ordinary transfers are those items that we transfer to other agencies which help support the mission of KDOT. Whether it's safety or innovation, but those items are are directly related to the mission of the agency. Extraordinary transfers are transfers that really have no direct tie to transportation. And so what I can say is thank you to the legislature and to the governor for slowly working down the amount of extraordinary transfers that have come out of the state highway fund in the past few years, to the point that this year, fiscal year 23 will be the first year that we will not have any extraordinary transfers out of the state highway fund. And just a little more detail about those transfers, the recommended transfers for fiscal year 24. The two agencies that we transfer the most to are the Kansas Highway Patrol and the Kansas Department of Revenue, both of which help serve the mission of the agency. There's one new transfer, one new line item this year, and that is a $12.6 million transfer to Department of Revenue for the replacement and modernization of license plates throughout Kansas. This modernization is needed to assist law enforcement campaigns, which are critical, obviously, to the safety of our roadway systems. So now talking about expenditures, these are what we call programmatic expenditures. So what we spend on all of our programs. Construction accounts for about 2/3 of our fiscal year 24 programmatic expenditures. So just for clarification, when we talk about construction, we're talking about lots of things other than just turning dirt out on our highways. Construction expenses also include the cost to design, the cost to inspect, the cost to purchase right-of-way and relocate utilities. So budgeted expenditures for fiscal year 24 construction are $528 million, which is about 27% less than what we expect to spend in fiscal year 23. Fiscal year 23 is a bit of an outlier in the IKE program, as we had several large projects, two in particular, that really added to the expenditures for fiscal year 23. Those two projects, US 69 Express in Overland Park and the North Junction project in Wichita. So now just a little bit more detail, diving deeper into how the KDOT budget is formulated. We have really two sides of our working budget. We have the limited side and we have the unlimited side. So the limited side is our agency operations budget, which I will go into a lot more detail on. The total expenditure limitation for agency operations is set by the legislature. The unlimited side of the budget, which includes all those construction items, is limited by cash flow. The agency operations budget includes expenditures of salaries and wages, contractual services, commodities, capital outlay. KDOT is authorized to revise expenditures among the categories, but it cannot exceed the total limit for agency operations without authorization from the legislature. So KDOT has requested authorization from the legislature to exceed its agency operations expenditure limitation 2 times in the last 10 years. Both of those times had to do with OITS modernization projects, and they were not for KDOT programs. So our fiscal year 23 revised budget, at the end of the day, we are asking for no budget increase. We want it to remain at $312 million. However, KDOT, as Merle noted, is requesting a nearly $9 million capital improvement supplemental, which falls outside of the agency operations budget. And the reason we need this supplemental, initial estimates for those fiscal year 23 improvement projects were originally done in July of 2021. Since that time, KDOT has seen a nearly 50% increase in some project costs. The agency is requesting additional funding so that approved projects can continue without delaying or reducing scope of other projects. So now if you look at our agency operations budget over time, our fiscal year 23 and 24 proposals reflect the resources needed to support the increased work as we ramp up IKE. And I'll show you in a later slide what the ramp up of IKE looks like, and then as it continues on into the end of the program. For fiscal year 23 and 24, the budgets get us back to about the $300 million range, which is about where we were at the beginning of the T-Works program over 10 years ago. So one thing to note is that we are doing a better job of managing the budget that we have been allotted. We spent nearly all of our approved budgets in fiscal year 21 and 22. So what that means is that we are doing a good job of coming to you with a request for a budget. And then once you authorize that budget, we are spending it appropriately and within the approved budget that you have given us. So as I noted earlier, we have had an increase in our agency operations budget to help deliver the IKE program. But if you look at it relative to the overall expenditures in a given year, you will see that we are actually staying steady or maybe slightly less than what we have been in some years. Even though our agency operations budget has increased in fiscal year 23 and 24, it still represents a lower share of our overall budget compared to 5 or 6 years ago. So now looking at our fiscal year 24 budget compared to our fiscal year 23 revised budget, KDOT is requesting an increase for our fiscal year 24 budget of about 14 million, which represents about 4.6% increase from fiscal year 23. So just as a side note, this increase is in line with inflation estimates from the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group. According to that group, the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers in calendar year 23 and 24 is forecasted to be about 5%. So just as some details about particular line items up there, salary and wages, we talked a little bit about that. This increase is primarily from the addition of the targeted pay increase for the fiscal year 24 budget. The pay increase will be absorbed in fiscal year 23 through anticipated salary savings. But since the need for those positions has not changed, we will continue to ask for the same number of positions at the higher salary rates, resulting in an $8.1 million increase in the proposed salary budget. For contractual services, this increase represents expenditures for IT contract programming and engineering consulting services needed to deliver the IKE program. And then in terms of capital outlay, this primarily includes a restoration of one-time reduction to fiscal year 2023 capital outlay. As Merle discussed earlier, in fiscal year 22, we were able to spend ahead, knowing that there were going to be, price increases due to supply chain shortages. We anticipated that, purchases some capital outlay items early on for fiscal year 22, allowing us some savings and flexibility in fiscal year 23, which we then passed on and to help pay for the salary increases. So in fiscal year 24, we are going to ask that that money be restored to what it would have been in fiscal year 23. So I'm going to talk a little bit on the next couple slides about the staffing challenges that we have at KDOT. This is something that I've talked about numerous times, and I think it's probably similar to many stories that you're hearing from other agencies. But staffing levels at KDOT have continued to drop and is really what I consider to be one of the, if not the biggest risk to being able to deliver the IKE transportation program. So recruiting and retaining experienced and qualified workforce is obviously essential to performing our fiduciary responsibilities, which is oversight, planning, designing, and maintaining our transportation system. The last 2 legislative sessions have had across-the-board pay increases for state employees. Governor Kelly also issued an executive order in the fall to enhance pay for over 1,500 KDOT employees, and I'll discuss that in a little more detail in the next slide. While all this has been helpful, we still have issues recruiting and retaining. We would welcome any assistance from the legislature, from the governor, and obviously we are ready to step in and help in any way possible to help solve this problem. So one key area of concern for the agency is construction inspection. The construction inspection for a lot of KDOT projects is being done by what we call engineering technicians. That's a classification. And you can see that the trend has been that we have lost progressively more engineering technicians over time, where we're about 30% loss from calendar year 22 to calendar year 2018. At the same time, we have ramped up construction where those inspectors need to be. So right now we are doing a lot more with a lot less. And, I think the point is that this can't be this cannot be sustained. It's unsustainable, and we need to figure out how to be able to recruit and retain the inspectors that we have. So last year, as I said, KDOT performed a market analysis and presented a proposal to the governor's office to increase base rates for some of the most critical and hard to fill positions in the agency. Now, as I said earlier, I'll say it again, all employees at KDOT serve a critical need. But some of them, it's just much harder to employ, it's much harder to recruit, and it's much harder to retain. So these positions included equipment operators, highway maintenance supervisors, engineering technicians, and engineers. And like I said, it counted for about 1,500 employees total. We also worked with KDHE and the Department of Ag who have engineers on staff. We worked with them to make sure that our pay increases would be able to be managed by them also for their engineers that they have on staff. The one thing that we want to try to avoid is setting it up so that one agency is paying more for a certain position than another and competing with each other for the same employees. So these base pay increases range from 5% to 17.5%. And why is this important? Because we still have a lot to deliver in Ike. Ike was envisioned originally to be a $9.9 billion program. To do that same amount of work that was originally envisioned in Ike, we're really probably talking about an $11 billion program now because of the massive increases in inflation that have happened over the last couple of years. So obviously, we still have a lot of work to do to get us to the end of Ike and starting into what we would hope is the next transportation program. So I'm going to transition now to some of the new features in the fiscal year 24 budget. So because we have had the flexibility in Ike to be able to shift money around from one fund to another, and because of an increasing need that's been demonstrated by applications received in our Kansas Airport Improvement Program, we were able to shift $5 million in fiscal year 23 to be able to award $10 million of projects for the KAIP. We expect to do that also for fiscal year 24. And we'll continue to evaluate that as we see the applications come in. If the backlog continues to be strong, we may continue to supplement that program. And then another program that has been discussed a lot in the legislature is our Innovative Technology Program. So last year, a proviso was placed in the bill to add additional money to this program and also to make universities eligible to apply for this program. What I will say is that for many reasons, this program has had a hard time getting off the ground. Some of it is internal. We have lost staff in that area. We really had one person who was running point on that. He retired last year. And so we have had to get new staff involved to be able to springboard that program. I think some other things that we have noticed is that there seems to be a lot of confusion from locals about what this program is really trying to solve. So we need to do a better job of communicating the purpose of this program and make it as frictionless as possible for locals, universities to be able to apply for this grant. So that is what I would say is we have more to share on this. I hope to have better news to share on this particular program next year as we have tons and tons of good applications coming across the door. And I'm going to wrap up talking about performance management. Obviously, when we talk about budget, it's important to talk about value, right? How do we demonstrate the value to taxpayers of what they're getting out of the budget that we are spending? And a lot of that has to do with how do we measure performance. So I think you guys have probably seen this slide a couple times, that I'm just going to remind you what you're looking at. Pavement, our roadway system is probably one of the, if not the biggest asset that our state has. And so understanding how it performs and how to maintain it and the most efficient way to maintain it is extremely important. Our previous pavement metrics, which are really federal performance measures, measure surface conditions of the pavement. And what you can see up there on the left-hand side of the screen is you can see a section of US 83 that has recently been overlaid. Looks like it is in very good condition, right? And by all accounts, our previous pavement metrics would have called this good condition. But if you took a core out of the pavement, which we did, to see what it looks like underneath the surface, you'll see that there are portions of that pavement that are falling apart. And so really what we have been able to do over the last year or so is to re-envision what we measure on our pavement so that we are capturing not just the surface condition, which is important. It's important to understand how the surface condition works. There are many things that we can measure there that are important, but we also need to understand what's going on underneath the pavement so that we know that we are putting the right action on that pavement at the right time. So we developed a new metric. Next slide, please. Which measures not just surface condition, but the underlying structure of the pavement also. And with that new metric, we have started to do some analysis. And so we've put together this pavement performance tool, which is out there for anybody to see. And there's a website link on the next slide. But basically what this allows us to do is to look at how funding and how our budget and how much money of our budget, or how much of our budget we put towards pavement, how that affects not just performance now, but performance well into the future. So it's really looking ahead and really linking the money, the investment that we spend on this key asset and how it performs long term. So like I said, you can go to this website, kansaspavement.com. It will walk you through the process of being able to run your own scenarios and really look at how we can address pavement performance long term. And then from an even bigger perspective, I just wanted to point out that we have a new pavement measures dashboard. So over the last year and a half, the agency has been taking the mission and the vision of the IKE transportation program and turning it into key performance metrics that we put out there publicly for people to see. So we've turned these into high-level metrics in several different categories. I go out and look at it anytime, but these metrics will step you through some of the data that we collect and how we are forecasting those metrics to be in the next few years and what our targets are for those particular metrics. And with that, I will open up the floor for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for the secretary? Representative Resman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last year we passed, I understand the connected vehicle infrastructure now, thanks to Representative Delding. I'm sorry? He schooled me on it. But last year we passed a bill that would have a trial for these connected vehicles. And I was just wondering if that's taken place, because I think it was a 1-year trial, wasn't it? 1-year trial. And I was just wondering if that's taken place or if we're still in the process of evaluating these vehicles.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I don't know the answer to that question. I'm going to turn and look at Joel.
There was a bill to create the CAV committee and offer up an opportunity.
Okay. So what Joel said is that the bill did not actually authorize the trials. It authorized the development of a continuous automated vehicle committee, which would then lead into potentially trials. So that's what we understand. We'll double check on that, make sure, but
you probably understand it better than I do, because I'm going on memory, which is not reliable. So
yeah, we'll double check and get back with you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. I have 2 quick questions. Where are we at with the Polk Quincy Viaduct project?
Thank you for the question. So we are currently in the final design phase of the project, which means that we're finalizing plans. Part of that phase is also acquiring the right-of-way and relocating utilities underneath where the future viaduct will be. So we are, I believe at the last count, we were about 80% in acquiring all of the properties that we needed to acquire in order to build the new viaduct. And then we're also partnering with the city of Topeka in order to relocate most of the utilities that are mostly theirs underneath the viaduct. We expect to let that project at the end of calendar year 24. Want to make sure I get that right. So a year and a half from now. Yeah.
Thank you. And one follow-up question, which does or maybe does not have to do with it. You had that under the capital improvement supplemental, costs for projects have increased almost 50%. I think you attributed that mostly to inflation. Is that true? Is that what?
Yes, that those costs are attributed to inflation. Like I said in the presentation, those cost estimates were generated in fiscal year 2021. You know, by many accounts, KDOT has seen on its own projects, highway construction projects, as much as a 45 to 50% increase in prices from 22 to 20. So those same price increases are reflected also in our building prices.
Okay, and that 50% increase, can you just give me like an idea of what that all is? That, I mean, is that like raw material? Is that trucks and equipment, or where is the biggest expenditure of that increase due to inflation?
So for
if you understand my question.
No, I think I understand your question. What I'll say is I don't think I can answer that question accurately from up here. We will go back and get a better answer for you. But my gut tells me that a lot of the increase for our building construction is to two main things, which we see also on our highway projects. It's labor. Labor is much more expensive, and then materials are also. Some materials are just much harder to find and much more expensive.
Thank
but
you.
We'll get a better answer for you.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Representative.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony. With that, we'll close the hearing on Kansas Department of Transportation, and our next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, March 1st. Anything else from the committee? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you. And I realize the hearing's closed. Could I ask the reviser a quick question, if I may? On the budget itself, page 1,538. I think it's just typo. I just want to hear it from you. So middle paragraph talks about of the 3.8 billion, the agency estimates receiving 750 million. And goes on the second line, it says this equates to $150 annually. Is that supposed to be million?
No, the analyst just took his cut from that calculation.
Oh, that's all I need to know.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Delperdang, you are correct. That should be 150 million.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And with that, we're adjourned.